always, always with the awkwardness in the beginning. But this is very exciting. Instagram is telling all of our friends that we are live. Yes, excellent. I think this is going to be requested and sent. And you're hoping for, here we go. And here we go. In the immortal
Excellent.
of the Joker.
I'm surprised that went so swimmingly this time,
Yeah,
considering it took us 30 minutes last time.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I prayed and I crossed my fingers and I did all of that good stuff.
And I updated my apps, something I usually refuse to do. So
That's probably the most important and relevant thing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. I hope there are no children watching, but anyways,
they're better.
you're in trouble. This is our artist feature with the Caesar of sonnets, the Viceroy of rhymes, the Frontenac of form.
Ooh, I like these titles.
Now that last one, that's all French Canadian. So that's a reference not everybody will get.
It was over my head, but I appreciated it.
So I remember when we met, it was on the Facebook page called the Facebook Poetry Society, of which we were both unceremoniously kicked out of.
Yep, that's about how it went. I have a fun story in regards to that.
Oh, yes, please.
So, as most people know, I kind of dabble with multiple characters. And it was very interesting because Brian Stark had Antonio as a moderator for a good couple months. And on the day that he took Antonio off as a moderator, he made Ruby a moderator. So, just wanted to put that out there of the intelligence of that man.
That is absolutely hilarious. So yeah, the multiple identities. Why don't we start off with that? Why don't we start off with talking about the reasons for all of your different identities and the philosophy behind that? Because I think that's super interesting. I think a little bit about it, but obviously some of these fine folks wouldn't know anything about it.
So, it definitely started off more as a minor experiment and more of a joke. And then it kind of blossomed into a little bit more, and it's almost like the further I got involved, the more I wanted it to mature as a scientific experiment, if you will. At first, it's very obvious. I think that on social media, uh, women will get more immediate attention. That's generally apparent, you know. And so I was like, all right, fine. I'm seeing this lady getting, 20 likes, and I'm only getting 5 likes, and my poetry's better. Well, all right, let's play this game. And so what I tried to do at first with the Ruby account was make terrible poetry, just to see if even if it's bad, that it'll work. And it did. But what I did quickly realize afterwards was there was an immediate gratification of it, but you were also getting likes for the wrong reasons. So although I got more of a following, it was not a good following per se.
Right.
And so then I started making her change a little bit. Aside from being a little bit feisty, she also started writing some of the good poems to some of the Antonio poems. And what I noticed was, after enough time, the good poets started to pick up on, ooh, you're kind of talking just like that. And I love it whenever I would get a message, like I got one from David Hutchinson. I think he's on the Instagram. He pops on here.
Oh, yeah. I know
Dave.
Dave.
He messaged me on the Antonio page, and he just goes, are you Ruby Reed as well? Like, I love whenever I would start getting messages of people getting it. At this point in the game, if you don't get it and you're on poetic license, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you should have gotten it a while ago. But for a little while, there was like a trickle-in effect of people messaging going, wait a minute, I figured it out. And then I'd be like, oh, you've only figured out half the puzzle. There's more. And so I started creating more personas to deepen the level, more breadcrumbs, um, because I wanted to experiment and find out, okay, aside from just sex, does race play into it?
Mm.
And granted, like, someone could look at what I'm doing and say, well, it sounds like you're doing a kind of bad experiment that, like it's not, I'm doing it with good intentions. I will let people know. I'm not trying to make a mockery of everything. I'm trying to see where the boundaries are. And I think it really is a little bit social media. But the experiment went a hair further when I started submitting to publication. And what I noticed was, at first I thought this is a social media thing, doesn't matter. Now I'm actually concerned for the welfare of the arts.
Mm.
Because I think that I had a good rant about this before. There's equity and equality. We need more equity to bring more people, different ethnicities, different sexes, bring them all in. Everyone should have a fair chance. But
Right.
then when you're on the playing field, I want to be playing as your equal. So my
Right.
biggest problem there was getting Antonio passed over for Ruby Reed poems when I'm submitting the same poem. Which,
Mm.
for starters, it screams all sorts of red flags. It says, did you read the poem at all? Because you got submitted the same poem by two different names. And why are you picking the girl over the guy? Could be honest mistake. After X amount of times, not so much. So this is going to be a long tell-all book that I'll write one day when I'm older. But for right now, I'm collecting screenshots and collecting data and having fun with it. I think the biggest important thing is to also walk away from the fact that it's an experiment and just have fun diving into a personality. I study a lot of psychology. I definitely have, there's the anima and the animus, and I definitely got a little bit of both going on. So when I jump into the Ruby character, I am kind of a different person. It is kind of a different part of me. You're seeing an extension at times. So
Yeah, it's super fascinating as a social experiment, and I mean I definitely it honestly probably took me longer than a lot of people, but it definitely started to pick up on it. I'm like, damn, this like the poetry is like the style is so exactly the same, but I think you did really good job of actually being able to communicate from a female perspective.
yeah, and I think that that's one of those areas that becomes the sort of gray area in the experiment because in all reality, I can't speak for women. I can guess the experience, but I cannot adequately say the experience. I did my best to go into that side of me and that persona, but at the end of the day, I think that if you want a woman's perspective, you ask a woman. So and that's where I kind of get a little strung up on it because I think we all have multiple identities within
Mm,
us. There's the
definitely.
outward thing that you see. There's the inward thing. So there is like that, like I said, the anima and the animus. But again, like I don't have periods. I'm never going to go through childbirth. There's a lot of like I can walk down the street and I'm not going to get catcalled. And there are
Yeah.
just certain things I will never understand. So what ends up happening, I think, is a lot of times when we dive into a different character like that, is it's a caricature. It's our idea of how that is, and it's not always the truth. So people, if you're seeing the Ruby Reed account, feel free to call out when you think she's wrong or whatever. Like you know, it's poetry. We're supposed to debate.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into your history with poetry. Where did it all begin? Those first steps. How did it begin? Why did it begin? Why did you want to dive into it? What was your style like in the beginning, and how did it evolve?
So I think, like most people, it stemmed mainly from music. Um, I'm a helpless romantic. I had one of those high school crushes where I was friend zoned and it's just this classic tale, right? So I had to tell it, right? But I would write music with my friends and I'd write lyrics and I realized that I was not just obviously I wanted to express myself in a lyrical format, but I realized early on my mother had been training me from a young age. My mother is like the king of puns. Like if there's a pun or a rhyme that's said at the table, my family will just keep zinging them off until we've said everything. Like, I don't know if you're part of one of these families, but like someone makes a joke at breakfast time and goes, "Oh, that's excellent," and then you go through the whole gambit of all the bad jokes, all the puns. So my ear and eyes were trained to see things in words, and I definitely blame my mother for it. She actually used to write for the Gloucester something high school paper and do a poetry section. So I come from
Oh,
a long line of poets, and no, one day I decided to stop writing just like shitty love lyrics and decided to just pen a poem, and I was kind of happy with it. Um, the stuff that's in Art of Sin, those were like that was my first foray into it. And although I've changed, I've developed new ideas along the way, I'm also really proud of where I started because a lot of people are going to say like, you change a lot as you grow as a poet. In all reality, I learned what I was doing that was right and learned what I was doing that was wrong. That's all that's changed, but I think the heart of it, the core of good poetry, it does start from an early age, and from that you just learn what you're actually doing.
yeah. I think it's really interesting that you mention music and starting off from like a lyrical perspective because certainly I can't speak to your poetry then, but your poetry now is very, very heavily focused on rhythm and rhyme and meter, which is done always so beautifully and impeccably. Obviously, that musical aspect must have been a huge influence on your style.
Well, that's the thing with music. You already have like a built-in cadence without realizing what the hell you just did. You have all the structure without knowing you had structure to it. So if you can make a song, you can make a sonnet. That's kind of how it breaks down because you'll hear different rhythms and you'll realize how long the lines should be, and it just falls into place. If you have that extra syllable. I feel like music you get away with the extra syllable more often because it can be sort of a grace note into the next one. And in poetry, it's a little tougher to say like, oh, there was the 10 syllables, and that's really just a grace note to this next line. It's tougher in that respect. So music has a bit more flexibility to it. Um, and obviously, I need to say this right up front. I was probably influenced by The Cure a little bit.
Ah,
Um,
yes, 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 nice. Good man, good man.
yeah. So as far as did I also play like guitar, bass, drums? I play and piano. I play a little bit of everything. I actually grew up classically on the saxophone, learned my music theory there. Um, Cure for the sound of guitar work and music, but lyric wise, I would say Third Eye Blind, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
Just the confessionalism within that kind of music really inspired me to like, okay, just pour it out on paper. And I think it's something incredible because um, I pour out a lot of truths, but what I do is, especially with my wordplay and all the other stuff, it's like it's an open diary, but it's in code. So I've poured it all out. It's out there, but I don't have to worry about my family going. So asking the questions, because they just can't read it.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and I think that's like kind of hits on the essence of poetry, especially as it gets separated from historically from narrative and storytelling. Is that there's a certain even in the most simplest poems, there's a certain bit of hiding it in metaphor and abstraction.
Yeah, exactly. If we just wrote it in straight prose, what would be the point? It's just a confession that's just straightforward. I'm not going to the priest to confess. I'm going to the
Mm.
public to confess, and I'm pouring it straight out. And what I love is because there's so many interpretations of it. Someone else who might be going through a similar type of thing, they know that they're being kind of heard and that they're being spoken for a little bit, but they don't have to say it out loud, sort of thing. And just to know that other people feel it, that's what I like about it. Like if you don't understand it, that's fine. It's only for the people who understood it, and the people that understood it are they're strengthened by it. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, and that's the beautiful thing about poetry, I think. Probably more than a lot of art forms, certainly more than prose. I think it's far more interactive. with the audience in terms of both interpretation and in terms of having a relationship with it.
Yeah, and I think that also like with the poetry groups, over time you start building and cultivating your audience. People know what they're looking for. They kind of are starting to get more of the story. It's like each poem is almost like a chapter. You're getting a little bit more. You're deeper into it. You know me as an artist. You know me kind of as a person. So you have an idea when you're walking into a poem of where I'm coming from with it. So it's always interesting when there's like someone new reading my poetry and really diving into it because they've only seen just like one slice, one cross section of it now. And I think you do. That's why we have poetry collections. You need to read a whole thing to really grasp what the hell's going on. Because a one-off poem, it's hit or miss, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are definitely a person who has cultivated a very specific voice. How did that evolution happen? How long did that take? What was that process like?
So as far as specific voice, I think that, I mean, I guess you start actually with just upbringing. Like we all have our own types of ideologies and thoughts, and I come from a, let's just put it this way, a very Republican family. I pretend that I'm a libertarian, but I'm probably swinging right. Although I never voted for Republicans, so that's on the record. Uh, but I think that ideologically, I'm actually closer to like Ayn Rand. I'm one of the few people that'll defend that broad. Like I think that her thought process is quite on par. And it's funny because, to put it lightly, the poetry community is made up generally of a bunch of free-thinking liberals who everything's happy, everything's roses, you know. And I think that when someone's like, you know, I'm an engineer, like my mind is wired for engineering. It's wired for like, you know, 1+1 and money and stuff like that. So I think I even approach poetry and theory that way. I love psychology and I love studying that kind of stuff. So it's just a weird voice that I'm kind of developing where I want to be somewhere between Alan Watts, Einstein, and Ayn Rand. If there's a middle ground between all that, I guess. So
That
it's tough because on certain days, like, although I might sound like I have a distinct voice, I think that my voice shifts depending on the month. Honestly,
well, yeah, I think that's that's an element. Like everything is kind of a balance in that regard. There's an element of wanting to have a cohesive voice, but then there's also an element of wanting to evolve as an artist, try new ideas, new things, you know, different aspects of that, which I think is super important. How do you see kind of evolving as an artist personally, and how do you push yourself in new ways to keep yourself fresh?
so I think definitely the help of others. Competition, I think, spurs ideas, and whether we like to admit it or not, we're all each other's competitors. All right, you're a writer, you're my competitor, and I'm better than you. We can take it to fisticuffs. But like, I like seeing a good poem. When I see someone who did something good, it makes me go, okay, what did they do? Why did I like it? How do I improve it? How do I beat that? What's the next step? Like, a good example is like, well, me and James. I think we do a little bit of a back and forth, like where he strikes something, I strike something. We keep trying to, you know, bring it up a level. He's got a great background, great mind, and I like it because it's a different background than my own. But I, I mean, it's less about so much like counting the likes and the comments on Facebook, but actually seeing the poem's merit. Because I've seen like pieces of his and pieces of yours that don't receive a ton of likes, but then I go like, whoa, okay, something was going on here. Whether he got attention for it, I want to take that to the next level. Because it's always about springboarding off into the next direction. Like a prime example is what's his name, Mike.
Davidson?
Yes, he recently he did a cover of my poem, which was really cool because he took it another level deeper. He made the thought go in a slight different direction, and it evolutionized the idea. And that's, I think, what the spirit of poetry is, we're all starting from one spot. We have a lot of the same tools, but how do we get it to move? How do we get it to change over time? So it's not so much that like I have a direction or I know exactly where I'm going. I just know every day is a new opportunity for me to get new incentive and ideas to continue moving forward. Um, and I think the biggest thing is just keeping your eyes open. Because some days it's those little things when you're in the park, and some days it's the actual literature you're reading. But every day you're getting bombarded with new stuff. That's why the best poets are the oldest poets, because they've seen a lot of stuff.
Definitely. I mean, for for a lot of years, I wrote horribly in complete and utter isolation. But just over the past 2 years, being really super engaged in the various poetry communities is super helped my writing style. Being able to see what people do, and yeah, there is absolutely a sense of competition. It's like, oh damn, you came up with that. Like I gotta do something in my own voice that like fucking takes that to another fucking level. There's definitely
Yeah,
that.
so you were in the Facebook Poetry Society, so you remember we used to do, I think, weekly challenges for a little
Yeah,
while.
yeah,
And I think that's really where like we need to get more of those going on, because it's different than a prompt. Prompts are good; they get you thinking, but they also get you sometimes. If you're not interested in the motif of that, you're not going to do anything for it. But I think when you have like a weekly challenge where it's like a form, what ended up happening was we half of us were doing the form and half of us were going, here's the form plus a bunch of other stuff I did to it. Like we're all trying to make that next level poem. And I always thought that was great because I was like, if I don't try hard enough, then Lucy's gonna outdo me, Lynette's gonna outdo me. I gotta put like an acrostic in here. I gotta splice this in. You just want to pack as much as you can into such a short space. Because poetry, I love how it can be so compact and so complex at the same time. So you always want to just jam it full, like every word counts, every space counts. So that's what I'm usually going for.
yeah, definitely. And you know, that's such a huge difference between poetry and prose. I mean, I don't want to diss prose, but there's a sense of having to do so much more with less, but at the same time, that makes it so densely packed and so transcendent and submergent in a sense because it's like everything fucking matters. Like I know you don't particularly like grammar, but in terms of periods and commas, I know you
Oh
like
yeah,
ellipses, but that's definitely something that I like obsess over. Is like even like where does that comma go and where does that period go?
well, I'm kind of mean to the reader because my thought is if I can read it the right way, you can read it the right way. Like figure it out. I'll put a return. I'll make it a new line if I need a real break and whatever. But everything else, it's flowing. But I make the reader suffer. It's in there. You just got to figure it out.
I make the readers suffer too, but in different ways because they have to go to a dictionary.
Exactly. Like last week's stuff. There was a ton of stuff that was over my head. There was a lot of stuff I had to go back and like, okay, what's this? Just to make sense of it. So I think when you have like a very strong theme, it's difficult because you're packing a lot in, but you can also lose the reader in some regards. Because if that's not your thing, you're just not going to read it. So I always want to try and write with a universality in the sense that like obviously we want as many people to read it as possible, but I think Hemingway is a big influence where
Mm.
I tend to I try to go for the simpler words, even though I'll still do some linguistic gymnastics. I'm not trying to stretch the vocabulary too crazy because I want I want my father to read it and understand, even though he doesn't. Like I want that to happen.
That's uh, that's that's really funny because I showed my mom some of my poetry that was published in a book, and she had absolutely no fucking idea what the hell I was on about.
Well, that's why they kind of like need a spark notes for it. So the last week or so, I've been doing some posts where I write like an explanation. I'll write like a 2 paragraph thing before the poem, be like, here it is in layman's terms, ruining the joke. Now read the poem. But that's what it is. Like a poem is like a joke. You don't want to spoil it. Like if I have to explain why what I did was clever, then it's not clever anymore.
But I think you tread the absolute perfect line between, you know, accessibility and complexity. I think that you have an incredible depth of thought that is definitely able to be accessed if the reader is willing to delve into it deep enough.
Exactly. That brings me to my next point. See, the difference between poetry and pottery, right? They're very similar words. The difference is um, poetry will bring the horse to water. Pottery helps it drink it.
Ah,
I can only, as a poet, I can only bring people to the idea. If they want to drink it, that's their own prerogative after.
so as you are crafting these brilliant poems, incredible form and rhyme and all of that incredible detail, which oftentimes the thought of just gives me a migraine. What is your process?
The process generally is I hear a single word that intrigues me, or I have a single line. I have, and I It's funny, I actually usually write poems backwards, especially sonnets. I'll either start in the middle and work out or start from the end and work up. Which, I never start, the first word I write is never the first word of the poem. That's just how that goes. Like, because you don't want to give away the gem right away. Like, you come up with the gem, you have the idea, you saw it, and then you're like, okay, that's good. How do I get there? How do I get the reader there? So then you have to stack on some stuff in order to pull yourself in. And usually it starts with, one good line, get it the right length, get it the right end word, and then from there blossom upwards and downwards accordingly. Um, it's funny because when I write free verse, that's the only time I'm probably close to starting at the top down. But with structured poems, never. I can't do it. It just, because it's sort of like you don't know where the poem's going to lead you. That's why I'm usually right around the turn. The second to last line is where I actually start from. Then I build up the top, and then I go, now I know what the last line's supposed to be. Like you kind of learn it as you go. I don't think anyone comes with the full poem in their head. It's not like a concrete block. But definitely words, and I try to not use the same words I've used before. Like if I've already made that word play, I can lightly put it in maybe, but if I've already butchered it, I've done it enough times, I can't do it again. Like, so it has to be original. You have to get that one original nugget. I think the Hemingway thing was like, write one true sentence and the rest will flow. Like something along those lines. And I think the same is true for poetry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that super interesting too, as it applies to form. I know from my own writing process, it is a fucking mess. Like sometimes I will just be writing down single words or a single sentence, and it just kind of grows as a jumbled mess, and I have no idea what the fuck it is. And I'm like, I don't know I don't even know what this means. I have no fucking clue yet. But it's like chiseling away. It's like a sculptor, really. And
Yes.
then
Yes, it very much.
eventually, it reveals itself to me. The universe kind of figures it out with me.
Well, that's the thing. So I never really go back to edit poetry. Like I'm never after it's done. I'm not revising really a line unless I really screwed up on the there or your. Sure. But generally speaking, I've always agreed with that the sculptor analogy. Um, who did the David? That's Michelangelo.
Hmm.
Yeah, he had some quote about the idea of like the art's already there. I'm just like freeing it. I'm just exposing it. I'm chipping it away, but that statue already existed inside it. And I feel the same with poetry. Like when I get like a good idea and I start chipping away at it, I'm like, that was already there. All those words were ready to intermingle because the language was already established. The ideas were already in the atmosphere. And you've just, it's like pulling stuff from the air and it was always meant to be. And that's why I hate the idea of rewriting a poem or changing a line because, not to say I'm perfect, but I kind of am. Like once it's done, it's done. You know.
I, you know, I totally agree with absolute arrogance in your art. I'm the same way too. I'm like, fuck, kind of fucking brilliant.
I know. Sometimes I go back to my old works and I go, damn, I'm a smart man.
Yeah, I do the same too. It's like I reread my stuff over and over again. I'm like, fuck, god damn, you're a genius.
And that's good. You should be proud of work. I think that there should be arrogance in poetry and in all arts. Like if you don't think you're producing something good, well, it's a tough one. Because then you got people like Kafka, right? Kafka hated his work.
Mm.
He had tried to submit it a bunch of times. It was all junk. He burned like 50% of it. And then he told his friend before he died, he's like, hey, all that literature I wrote, burn it. His friend looked at it, he said, this is kind of neat. And he got it published, and now Kafka is a very well-known name, right? I think that artists should not be afraid of their brilliance. I think they should be a little self-centered. You know, it's not bad to be cocky. But you'll get knocked in your place sometimes. Every once in a while, I'll get knocked in my place where I do some horrid mistake. You know, mistakes can happen. Like you write a sonnet and you did it with 12 lines or something. You did something like just. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal to some people whoever's listening, all four of our viewers, but it's a big fucking deal. Like doing something like that. So we can all have gaps, but when I have a good poem, I'm happy with the poem, and I am the best poet that ever lived. I also screamed that from the rooftops in Paris. Me and my wife, when we did our honeymoon, I was in Paris, so I felt the urge to let the world know I am the next great American poet. And, you know, someone told me to shut up, or however you say that in French. So.
That is awesome. I gotta do that. I gotta go outside at 3 a.m. and just start screaming to the neighborhoods that I'm the best poet ever. And
yeah, you gotta let it be known out to the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, you might be the next great Canadian poet. You know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I got the United States. You could have Canada. Well, you'll have to duke it with probably Ron. That's some stiff competition.
Yeah, that's right. I'm ready to go head to head though. Now, I kind of feel like that poetry, or at least the writing process, is kind of like ecstasy and anguish. And I tend to go through this cycle, and you can say how much you agree or disagree personally, where in the beginning, where I don't know what the fuck it is, I'm super anxious about it. And then as it evolves, then I get super excited, and then as it finishes, I get super arrogant, and then I share it, and I'm like, that's awesome, and I'm like, holy fuck, I have to write another fucking poetry. What the fuck am I doing? I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. I feel like every time, for me, is like a learning experience.
I kind of follow that, where you're trying to, especially when you're starting to explore more and more forms and you're trying to do stuff, it is a learning experience because, you know, there's different rules that you're applying and you're trying to do the best you can always the first time. I think now at the stage of my life that when I'm actually writing poetry, I'm typically writing it while I'm at work. Whether I'm working at the park on the weekends or doing my engineering job. By that regard, I'm actually probably one of the highest paid poets in the world per hour. I figured that out. I did the math. But so for me, I don't start writing a poem, I guess, unless I know it's going to be worth it. Like, unless that, like, you know how I was saying you start with that kind of one gem?
Right,
if that gem isn't worth it, like, it'll go through my brain, and I think there's a Mitch Hedberg joke about it. Like, if the pencil's too far, I convince myself the joke isn't funny, so I don't write it down. But if I'm taking the time to pull out my phone and start it, I'm going to finish it. And I think that I'm always setting a bar for myself of it needs to either be perfection of form or perfection of thought. It's better when it's both, but if it's neither, then what are you doing? You're just wasting your time and you're wasting the reader's time. Like we got plenty of Daisy poems. Like, we don't need you got to bring something good to the table. Otherwise, put down the phone, put down the pencil.
Yeah.
So I think I don't go through an anxiety when I'm starting the poem. I think I go through I know it's a challenge. I'm like, okay, how am I going to get to that next step? So there's a definite, usually, so actually, this is a fun little tidbit. Like, I kind of I treat my life like a movie. So sometimes there's soundtracks playing, right? A lot of the times it'll be the song "Come Together" by the Beatles. Like, when I go like, ooh, that's an idea. And I'm like, oh yeah, time to get in the zone, time to be Ruby, time to, just knock this out of the park. I think the easiest example is, did you watch the new movie Cruella? That new Disney version of the. Anyways, in the movie, like, I like kind of that evil mastermind where you're like, ooh, I have a new idea. And then you take it that next step. Like, so when I'm diving into a poem, I'm like, I have the new idea. I'm excited when I go into it, and it's this kind of evil, maniacal thing in my brain that kicks on. So I think I definitely approach the poem a little bit different. I'm never quite nervous, I guess, about it. And one of the things I'm glad about, though, is I'm never nervous about how people are going to interpret it. In the regard of that's one of the beauties of poetry is nobody really reads it. So, like, the worst thing that happens is I write it and, like, no one likes it. Okay. Like, I'll know it was brilliant, even if no one else knew it was brilliant. So I'm never worried about the reaction, because some of my worst pieces have gotten my best ratings, and some of my best pieces have gotten it's just, that's how it goes. So I'm never worried, I guess. I'm just diving in, and I know if it's good. If it's good, I'm going to keep going for it and finish it off.
Yeah, that aspect is always fascinating and inexplicable. What poems are going to hit generally with an audience, and which ones don't, which are often interesting, because it's so often the case. It's like, I don't know, I think this one's good. Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, whatever. And then it hits, and then it's like another one. It's like, oh, this is fucking genius. This is the best shit I've ever written. It's like, and the people are like, whatever.
And that's the thing, like, that, especially with the little things I've been putting at the tops of poems now to, like, explain why it's that. I like and don't like that. I'd rather go down on obscurity, but then, like, as soon as I'm dead, for someone to go, this man was a genius. That's what I'm hoping, that someone discovers my works, and there's thousands of books published afterwards, and it's great. But it is kind of tough, because most of us, we will go down in obscurity. We will finish our writing careers at the age of 75, and then that's it. No one's going to read us anymore. We're done. So it is tough, because you're like, you're upset because you had that one good couplet. Maybe you had just one perfect couplet, Robert Frost couplet. Like, it's, and it just never got read by the right people, so it never touched the world the way it was supposed to. Like, forgive me for my arrogance, but I've written a couple good lines in my day, like Robert Frost good lines. And I'm like, why am I not Robert Frost? Why do people not like me like Robert Frost? And it's part timing. It's a lot of things. You can write good poetry and never be known, or you can be Rupi Kaur. And I think we both have an equal hatred towards that lady.
I can't even say what I would want to do without being kicked off of Instagram.
Oh, I know. Look, you can't, and the tough part about it is you can't call it out, because then you're just a hater. When you're like, oh, see, line by line, this is what you did. Here's a dangling modifier. Here's this. Here's that. And then people are like, why are you just hating on it? And it's like, all right, fine. I guess nothing matters. The rules don't matter because you already like the person. Fine. It drives me wild, but I think it's the same with, like, pop music versus like classical music. Like there's certain arts that I don't want to say take more skill, but I do take more skill than what she does.
Absolutely.
And you know, she has a popularity thing. Good for her. Whatever. You know, the Ruby account was basically Ruby Rupee, if you notice. I
Right.
picked that name
Love it.
on purpose, because I knew that people would jump on, and it did. It made me feel shallow. I felt like the empty vase of flowers, so you want to cultivate a good audience, forget it. It's better to be unknown but write the good shit. And the few people who read it, they get the good shit. Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I find it fascinating as somebody who the idea of a sonnet makes me want to blow my brains out. Um, that that you are the absolute master of sonnets, and you have even created your own version of a sonnet, which completely blows my mind. Talk to me about your own version of a sonnet and your love of sonnets and how that happened. And do you, at this point, does it just come naturally? Do you still find it difficult?
Yes, I think that I think in badoom badoom badoomps. Like when I'm writing lines, I flow wise, you're feeling those out. I think especially with sonnets, you start to appreciate cadence. You start to go, okay, what's trochee? What's iambic? You start diving into that side of the poetic world. Before then, yeah, you get syllable counts, and that's all well and good. But all of a sudden, you're like, oh, this word is 3 syllables. How is that really sounding to me? That's so. I feel like the sonnet is one of those. They're all going to be about the same, but there's something beautiful about it because it means you need to really know the rules. You can tell when someone wrote a sonnet but just knew the 14 line 10 syllables
Mm.
and lightly knew the rhyme pattern. You can tell when they're new to it and they're just applying the rules gently, and then when they're really understanding it and they're going that extra step deep. And I think it's always really intrigued me. Again, I'm going to name drop James. He's probably not watching, probably never will, but he's really good about that because I think he pointed that out to me. Was like, okay, I see what you did. He brought me to the next level where he's like, why did you choose that word when this word would do? And I was like, well, they're both 2 syllables. And he goes, hard, soft. And it's like, okay, every hard, every soft really, really matters. It's kind of, there's more to it than just like how many syllables, how many lines, and all that other stuff. But as far as the idea of the poem, too, it's nice because it's like a good joke, right? The build up, the turn, the punchline. And that's what a sonnet is. You're giving this idea, you're painting a picture, and then you're trying to at the last minute flip a little perspective on somebody. And you can do it for a plethora of things, whether it's, heartache or politics. You can present an idea, and it actually does well when you present an idea to show you understand a side and then give the opposite side. It really shows that you're not just a one-sided, here's my diatribe. It's saying like,
Yeah.
here's this, and here's me understanding both sides. Here's that little nugget. And I think that's what it is. That couplet usually at the end is like this nugget of just something. You know it's coming. You know by the end of the sonnet they're going to tie it up and put the bow, those last 2 lines. So I thought it would be interesting with the newer sonnet I've been working on to kind of shift it a little bit. And generally speaking, the form, it inverses everything. Instead of the 14 lines, 10 syllables, we're doing 14 syllables, 10 lines.
Oh.
And the way it works out nicely is you do a quatrain, a couplet where your turn will be, and another quatrain. And the originals for it, which I was working on, what I wanted to produce was something where it was a drastic change in perspective that was due to time. So it was like a memory when you were a child. You doing that first, then you do 2 lines that kind of bridge, and then how you see it now. Whether it's just seeing a leaf go down, it's following the water along the road, and then it goes down the drain. As a child, you see it one way. I think we all just saw that the it way just then, because we're influenced by culture. And then how you see it now, of course. And I think that was kind of, it's an obvious reflection, and I wanted it to be a reflection because there's symmetry within the form itself.
Right.
But then even within it, I sometimes allow myself to be a little bit freer with sonnets, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be that it's a reflection of past to present. It might just be a general shift in perspective. But it's kind of fun because you have equal amount of time to talk about both sides. Whereas a sonnet, you have more towards your initial statement, your problem, if you will, and then you have a quick resolution in a turn. Whereas here, you're doing equal on both sides and then tossing in something to bridge the gap between. So not everyone's cup of tea. I'm sure classicalists will tell me that nope, that's not a sonnet. But as far as I'm concerned, I invented my own form, and I'm damn happy with it because it flows nicely. I think the 14 lines gives more of a breath. You're able to say so much more in 14 syllables than within 10 syllables. And even though 10 syllables sounds nice, like it's just weird how it works out. Like 8 sounds good, 10 sounds good, and 14 sounds good. It does always have to be even for me. I can't stand 11 syllable lines. I've written a few like that just because I forced myself to. I can't stand it though. But 14 syllables is wonderful because you really are expressing a whole lot in that one line. And usually I'll toss in an internal. So part of the argument could be, well, why don't you just do 2 lines of 7 if you're doing, an internal in there? But fuck those people who make those kind of questions.
I find that that sense of having two perspectives in a sonnet wasn't even a thing that I had considered that needed to be a part of it.
Yeah, because sometimes it's more of a problem statement and then a resolve than it is a perspective shift. But the volta or turn is generally supposed to be a perspective shift. So what better way than pretending you're a child and writing about something you see and then reviewing it later? Because we all have nostalgia. Generally speaking, I mean, the whole poem is nostalgia in a sense because you're writing it from the later point, unless you really took your time and wrote it over the course of 10 years, which I don't think people will do. Although maybe the classicalists, they will try. Who knows? But the whole thing is nostalgia to begin with, so it forces you to really put yourself back into those shoes and see how you were seeing it as a child. But like I said, I've ventured from that. I wrote some good ones. I think I wrote one like hypocritical grace theory or something like that, just spitting political lines and throwing down gauntlets. But I think the original ones I was writing, they were definitely more timid. They were more about that sort of just reflective nature, whether it's a good perspective or bad one, but reflecting back more so.
I find that it's interesting when you talk about forms in poetry. It's interesting when it's done well. It's like the media is the message. When you hear a sonnet that's written really well, it's almost like it has to be. There's a certain classical linguistic flow to it. There's a certain je ne sais quoi, which is like almost an absolute necessity to it. And you are definitely a person who writes in so many different types of forms. It's mind-blowing. What is your opinion on form as a mode and form versus free form?
So I do like form because it's the rubric. Like if anyone's read music, you got your sheet of music, right? And I think the reason we like sonnets is generally because we know how the sound is going to go, right? Just like we like a limerick. Like you can hum a limerick without saying a limerick, and that's kind of nice. And I think that that's what people really like about the forms is you know what to expect in that regard. But I like the forms because I like to have a set of rules to break. I like to have that piece of paper where they have the nice butterfly and I'm supposed to color it in, and then I like to go over the lines and put a spaceship shooting them down. Like I like to have, the structure and then the fuckery. Like you need both in order to have something good. If you just come out swinging with just like you got a blank sheet of paper and you just put a bunch of spaceships and stuff going at it, like it gets a little cluttered real fast, right? You need a tiny bit of structure so the reader knows what's kind of going on, and you interject those little tidbits of screwing around. I would say this much though: when someone's first starting out with form, do the form correctly before you start screwing around. Like, don't jump right to the haha, I will do this now. Like, you learn the rule, do the rule for a few times, get like 10 under your belt, then go ahead, start interjecting the fun. Like, I think Sestinas are one of the ones where you can really screw around with them after you know the rules. Like, you should definitely do it authentic first, classico, and then you can have the spicy version later. And there's a lot you can do with those ones, especially because when you have like a repetition of an ending word, it can get tough, right? Because you got to pick really like, whatever it was, like 5 or 6 really good words to go with. Like, oh, yeah. I don't know if that's a strong enough word. It's actually better to pick a word that phonetically you could add on to the beginning and still have the end part of the word, and that allows you to do stuff later on as you're kind of going through it. I got really creative on one I wrote. It was called the Sistina Chapel. So it's like the Sistine Chapel, but of Sistinas. And the amount of junk I threw into that. Like, someone who understands Sistinas will look at that and go, nice. Someone who doesn't understand Sistinas will say, that's not a Sistina. Like, so that's why you have to have an appreciation of the authentic form in order to actually appreciate when you start screwing around and playing with it later on.
Right.
But sonnets, I think too much in 10 syllables these days. I feel like if I'm gonna, it kind of stinks because I feel like if I'm gonna say something, I may as well say it in the most classic of forms. Like, if I'm like, if I get to a line like that, how I said I come up with a good line,
yeah,
8 syllables, I'm like, okay, let's figure out how to get the extra 2 in there without bastardizing it. Because if it's that good of a thought, it might as well be a sonnet. And that kind of sounds snobbish, but I write enough other stuff that I get a pass, I guess.
No, I absolutely agree. And that sense of needing to know the form first before you can, fuck around with it, I think is a very a classical, traditional view on it. And
because there's like the expression is fuck around and find out. For me, I think it's the opposite. Find out and then fuck around.
And let us take a moment to plug. Is this reversed on camera?
Yeah, it looks reversed to me, but that's the way it should be seen. Because that's the way I see life,
This is Momentary Monet, a poetry collection by Montejo Sinclair, otherwise known as Antonio Eramo. So, talk to me about the process of creating this, of the themes, of choosing the pieces, and what the publishing process was like.
All right, so I think we'll start right from the get-go, stuff from the cover on. Montego Sinclair, even just as a persona, he is an alter ego, thus Montego. I actually have a different character. I think he was the illustrator in the book. His name is David, but he's the id, Montego is the ego. There's all these characters that come up later in other stories that I put together. But as far as the process, most of that book, like 50% of it, was written while I was doing poetry workshops while I was studying at SNHU. And I came up with a poem called Momentary Monet, which was about, seeing momentary Monets on a windshield, and the art and the destroyer. You got the windshield and that awful noise when you don't have the timing right. It kind of does that kind of thing. And this idea that we're all artists and destroyers. And the idea of a momentary Monet on top of the painting being momentary. I also thought of the idea of with all the character jumping that I do, that I'm a different artist. I'm a momentary artist. I'm a momentary Monet in the characters. Not just the art being momentary, but the characters and the writer itself becomes momentary. And that I think transcends even to who we are as a person. The book, it talks about a lot of different levels about well, let's just go right through the bases. It talks about gender fluidity a little bit. That there's some spices of that, but it's masked like just well enough that people a lot of times when they're like, "Oh, that's a topic in the book," and I'm like, read a few of the pieces, and it'll start, with that in mind, and it'll start coming out. Because that's obviously with like a character like Ruby Reed, that's a thought that's always been on my mind, and how it all kind of ties together. It's definitely more of a mental game for me. It's never came through like to the forefront. Like I'm not going down the street, painting my face. Not that there's anything wrong with that. People can do what they want, and I applaud people who have the courage to do so. But mine has always been more of a psychological struggle that I realize isn't. Yeah, I don't need to make it outwardly me, although I do sometimes outwardly through the characters I have in poetry. But it's something that's integrally part of me. So this idea of these cross sections of me, the cross sections of Monet, the cross sections of an artist, and the cross sections of art, and it's thrown together in this. And you'll see some rises and falls where the ego's up on some points, and I'm cocky as hell. And then there's other times where it's like, ooh, these are kind of dark. I hope this guy didn't off himself. So like I think Silver Angels is probably a good example of that. That's talking about like bullets to the head kind of stuff, and it's like. But then on another poem, I'll be talking about what's the one about flowers? The humdrum chrysanthemum one. That one's just about flowers fucking. Pluck me harder, right? So I'll have a lot of fun with it too. So there's the seriousness of it, but it generally it also it isn't afraid to make fun of itself too. It's definitely a trip with its ups and downs, and it ends on kind of a somber note, saying that like no matter what you kind of write, like people are going to forget it. I think I do a lot of writing about poetry itself and the poets and the reader. I think that's one of the things I constantly do. And like I say something like I wrote about death once, and everyone who read it died for a moment, and then they moved the fuck on. Like, and that's the idea is that like it's a moment, and that's the pinnacle of it. It's like saying like even death is just a moment. Everything is these moments of beautiful art.
Absolutely. And I found the longer piece in here intriguing with age that's combined both prose and poetry in various forms. Talk to me, because I think that really stands out as something that's like completely unique.
So, do you want to know a fun fact?
Yes, absolutely. Fun fact me.
Guess my middle name, or what letter it starts with.
Put me on the spot. Antonio. It's got to be alliterative, right? It's got to be an A or an E, right?
Keep thinking. You're going to get it. And actually, I just want to remember what page that poem is on, just so I know which one you're talking about. Because, to be honest, so the names of poems, those always come last. Poems typically have no names for me.
It's page 103.
Oh, I might have the old version at my desk. Oh, no.
You
have the good version.
It's with age, a sonnet of sorrowful setting. That's how it starts.
Ah, yes. Yes, that's where I broke it up. Oh, yes. Let me talk about this one. Now I know exactly which one you're talking about. So, there's a couple things. My middle initial is G. So my initials spell out age. So it's a little known tidbit in there with age. You're with me. You're going through the story with me. So that one, yeah, I had to do a class where we were writing prose, and I was just like, okay, we have to write prose, but I've written a couple stories like The Attic, Pride's Crossing, The Gates of the Arctic. I write a lot of short stories, but I constantly interject poetry into the prose that I write. And I kind of have this theory of how I envision it. Like, I guess if I had to put it into words, imagine like two different art forms put together. You got like Cubism in the background, and then you have like these Renaissance like flower tips, right? So I think of it as like a rose and stem, right? The prose is bringing you there, and then you get this little nugget at the end. And that's kind of how I like to write it, is that you're leading yourself in to get to something worth saying. And it's always tough because I never know when it's never going to be like an equal amount of prose to an equal amount of poetry. It's just like when
Yeah.
you realize, oh, this is where it should be interjected, you start interjecting it. But that one was a really fun one to write because I think that if I'm not mistaken that poem has three parts to it.
Yes, it does.
There's a sonnet, there might be a sestina at the end, and there's also there's another repetitious one. What's it called?
There's a sonnet of sorrowing, a phantom of patient lost.
Yes, Pantoums. The Pantoum of Doom. But yeah, so I tried a couple different forms. Uh, the one critique I did actually get, which I thought about later, was I started it doing the prose, poetry sort of thing, interjecting it every stanza because it felt right. Um, and I might circle back to this one just because I think it would be cool to interject a little bit more prose in the other parts of the poetry. It's just that when you're on sestinas, they're already so long that it would have felt weird to interject it, especially because I think the repetitious nature of it drives home a point. So separating it too far would lose the point. Whereas a sonnet, you can have those are just quatrains. You know, they're just quatrains that are hanging out. It doesn't even look like a sonnet. It's only if you put it all together that it's a sonnet. So I do love the idea of going back and forth between the two because although there's a lot of cool, neat stuff you can do with poetry, and it gets very technical, I think prose does give you a little bit more space to move things a bit more quickly, and it comes off more concrete. You know, I think even that whole first paragraph, I try to do short words and repetition and say it in a certain way where I'm like grounding the person before I put the song, you know, the lyrical part where it gets a little bit more obscure. But that's the abstract stuff. The prose is typically more concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's what it is. You got the concrete, and then the poetry parts are like the flowers coming up through the cracks. So now we got our analogy in there, right?
I thought that was an amazing um, combination because I mean strictly prose. I would find that extraordinarily difficult to write without injecting some poetry into it myself.
Yeah, exactly. Because our brains are wired for poetry. So, like, you know, too much prose, and we're like, all right, come on, give me something abstract. I get it. You know, you're walking down the street, you know. But that story itself, it was actually inspired by I live above my grandparents, and we have a nice grapevine. And stories like practically 100% true. Like, one year, like, he was like, oh, you gotta help me with the grapevines. And I didn't help him soon enough. He cuts them down. They look like shit. Everyone's like, oh, man, he's lost it, you know, whatever. Come midsummer, they're immaculate. They grew in perfectly. Everything was clean. And it was just like, wow, you know, never. Old people surprise me, especially my grandfather, Nano Dino. He is a character. He is 92, and he's just still surprising us, you know.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
In fact, I
incredible.
think he's in the poem Last Flight is about him as well. And my story, not in this book, but in the book Pride's Crossing, I have a short story called Pride's Crossing. Pride's Crossing is a place in Beverly, but I was told by my grandmother to go watch over him. Like he was going to go mail something, right? And she's like, watch him, but like keep your distance so he doesn't know you're watching him, right? Like be there to help him if he needs it, but let him do the task on his own. So it's this idea of not wanting to cross your elderly person's pride. You want him to do
Right.
it and still be proud of himself. But like, it's great. I live a life where I don't have to come up with these elaborate stories because elaborate stories are happening right in front of me. Like that seemed like good enough of a story to write about. And yeah, my grandparents are definitely one of my bigger inspirations.
So why don't we take an opportunity to read some of your poetry?
Awesome. I'll let you read it because you got better flow and I interrupt too much.
All right. All right. So the first one I am going to read is knee jerk reaction.
Mm.
And do I need to take my glasses off?
Old man.
I'm at this weird stage where it's like it's close enough, but not close enough. All right.
Yeah, no, I look over my glasses, so I'm there with you.
Bifocals, that's where it's at. Knee-jerk reaction. Black swans have their necks snapped by the blue waves, and white clouds watch where they can do nothing except cry. And as their tears settle, they see it is a cycle. That last line is absolutely.
It's pretty obvious what that poem's about. You want to take a stab at it?
I mean, there's definitely an element of death. Perhaps not in a literal sense, but the death that we experience in different ways in terms of change, radical change.
You're thinking too abstract. It's much simpler. And I'll give you a hint. There's a poem right next to it that'll give you an idea of what it could be about.
The Loon?
No, it might be the one before then.
The Last Flight?
I thought I put the poem Cop Out right next to it, but the poem Knee-Jerk Reaction is about George Floyd.
Okay. Yeah, Cop Out.
So you have a black swan. So if you look at the colors, it becomes very obvious. You have a blue wave, and you have white clouds. And it's the idea of we cry out when we see injustice, and as our tears settle and we move on, our tears are part of the problem, and the cycle continues. So it's very short. Obviously, a silly play on words with knee-jerk reaction, where it's like, that's, you hit it and then you.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
but it's saying knee, knee. The cop was a jerk, and then the white people's reaction towards it. I thought it was too obvious. Actually, when I wrote it, I was like, oh, this is just everyone's gonna get it. Too obvious.
Well, to be honest, I'm not all that great with interpretation, and as a Canadian, that whole thing is a little bit kind of like.
Fair enough. We were burning our cities, not your cities, so makes a little bit more sense by it. Yeah, I think a lot of poetry got written during that time period. It was definitely a turbulent. I mean, we're still in it, but it was a turbulent time for writers and for poets and for Americans. I think because it's a lot to take in because there's a lot of sides to it. There is like one obvious side to it, but there's like a lot of other moving pieces therein. And I think that it's tough because we're not mature enough as a country. I don't think any country is to have deeper conversations where we actually solve things and listen. I think that we very much just react. We're a reactionary country, and it really sucks because, and it also just sucks to be helpless as George Floyd was, but it sucks to also be helpless in that I feel like there's not as much that we can do as American people to fix this problem. And I think that a lot of people feel helpless, and that's why a lot of people joined, the protests because they wanted to do something. And I feel like we don't have a whole lot to show for it after like a whole year of burning cities and defunding police and refunding police. It's just like, are we any better off? Did we get any further? And the answer to me is honestly no. So it's a very tough topic to talk about, I think. So sometimes a short poem is a good way to do it because it's there. People either get it or they don't get it. It's just a perspective, and we move on.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, not just America, but I think probably America more intensely because everything about America is just fucking more intensely.
We turn the speakers up to 11.
Yeah, absolutely. but the tribalism and the inability to really set aside and just really listen to different perspectives, which in the end you don't have to agree with, but just for once, fucking listen. Just try to listen to understand different perspectives.
Yeah, and I think it's generally because the states are very different, and I think a lot of people. Hold on, I want to check my phone to make sure my battery power is still kicking because I think it stopped charging, and I just want to make sure I don't lose you like last time. I got you. You're charging. You're gonna be all right.
All right.
States are very different. Boston, like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, you cross a theoretical line, and yet it's different, right? It's just incredible how different sections of the country actually are, especially if you go from the cities to the suburbs. You go to West Virginia, and it's way different. So I think that when we're having a national discussion, there's a lot of pig-headedness because we're like, well, it's not like that over here. And so then we're not as apt to listen to what's actually going on in that section. That being said, then we try and make sweeping rules, which I am adamantly against. I think sweeping rules are terrible because for that exact reason. Like, states should have the power, the federal government should not, because the guys in Washington don't know what's happening on my street.
Yeah.
So a lot of aspects to that whole story. So why did you pick that poem? That's what I'm curious about now.
That that last that last quatrain, just I don't know, it was kind of like haunting and super emotive and just kind of caught me off guard. It was such a kind of a striking difference from the rest of the poem, because I felt like the rest of the poem is like, yeah, knee jerk reaction, change, um, death. But then that last quatrain was so, I don't know, it just hit me so emotively.
Okay, interesting. No, I like hearing even when it's a different perspective. I like that it still held some weight, regardless. That's cool.
And I'll read another one. Love is just a word,
Hmm.
tangled and intangible, of terror trapped in tryst. This personal interest is missed on those who don't insist. Instead of steadfast steeds stampeding through our stable, unstable minds unfold and furnish what is fable. Don't label this intrinsic thought on love that's lost, or love me not, or love is just a word where all other words are caught. Ah, the fucking the fucking rhythm and meter and rhyme of this is so beautiful and fucking impeccable, and the meaning of it is so incredibly deep.
Yeah, and there's also it's it's a fun one. This is another one where I started at the ending. I recall writing it, and I was this idea that love is just a word. That's a cliche, right? But I don't want to say it's just a word. I wanted to say it's just a word that entails everything. Like that.
Mm.
That was the motif of it, and then I had to go backwards. Um, and then I personally love the word tryst. I think it's great. It's a fun word, and then you have interest. Um, interest. You might pronounce it interest, but I'm pronouncing it interest. So then it lines up. So I love whenever there's a phonetic a homophone, but not really a homophone. It's just, whatever we want to call it when you have two words that make the sound of one word. But yeah, I think that one of the things I actually got insulted for this one. um,
Really?
so after the Gorman. Gorman did her speech, right, at the inauguration, and her little poem. And I'm like, hey, it's just a lot of bromides or bromides, however you want to pronounce it, and it's not really that great of poetry. Unpopular opinion. But the world is ready to congratulate her and crown her the new Robert Frost of poetry. So they were just like, you're a fucking jealous prick. And so they attacked Ruby. They attacked hard. I got death threats for it. Someone went on to, they connected the dots between Ruby Reed to Montego Sinclair, and they're like, aha, I found your book. I'm going to buy it just so I can prove a point. And then they read this one and they're like, oh, this is someone who probably like realize, the multiple homophone thing, and they're like, they insulted the fact that I have cadence and that I can do wordplay, and they gave me a 1 on the review. It brought down my ranking just a little bit, and it was a very it's a very long review that they left, but it was more about Gorman than it was about me, so I don't know what to make of that, but I got insulted specifically for this poem, so.
That is wild. Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't particularly a big fan of the work either. I have to say, a little bit.
Yeah, but I've learned sometimes it's better to just bite your tongue. People want to cheer on people, let them cheer them on. I think in general, in the mainstream realm, poetry is dead. It's very much dead. People don't understand it in the mainstream because you got. And I will say this: Gorman is a better poet than Ruby Kerr, by a long shot. She actually is. She went to college. She understands what she's doing. I just don't think that poem in particular was anything special. So I'm not insulting her directly, but I think what we want as mainstream stuff is we want the echo chamber. We want to hear what we already knew, what we already wanted to hear, and it doesn't matter if it's an expression that's been said a million times because you said it, you were on the podium. You're the best now because you validated what we wanted to hear, but you said nothing new. I think it would be more ballsy for a poet to get up and just say something that the crowd didn't want to hear. I think that's poetry. I think that's the essence I wanted. But different strokes for different folks, or however that saying goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Poetry is dead. And I don't know, isn't that kind of wonderful and freeing?
It is. I think that ties in with the whole idea that poetry is like a confessional thing that's in code that no one can read it. I love that it's dead. I would love to be recognized for my prowess, but here I am on Instagram Live. I got 3 viewers. Things are going great. It is dead and it's not dead. I think for the poets, it's very much alive. It's alive and well, and we're pushing boundaries and great things are happening. It's dead in the sense that it's not part of culture. Like, do we know what the #1 poem this year is, or the #1 book of poetry is? And do we care? No, because it's not any good, probably. So in that sense, in the mainstream sense, poetry is very much dead. And it sucks. I don't know if it's... I don't know who to blame, to be honest. If it's due to the fact that there's too much indie publishing going on, and now just people don't know what's good, or the fact that publishers also suck and don't know what's good. So, like, it's a complex. Who killed poetry,
It's social media, new technology. It's a fucking double-edged sword because everybody has a platform, but every fucking buddy has a fucking platform. So we all get fucking buried.
Yeah, and it's tough to get, like, I always thought it would be like a snowball, like, start picking up a few fans, do this, do that. Nope, the snowball peaks out. You either break through that ceiling or you don't, but there's like a cutoff. Like, I think even with the Ruby Reed account, like, in the first 2 months, I got up to, like, my 2,000 followers, and then it just stopped working. Whatever magic was there, it's like, nope, that is where you're gonna stay. So I don't know what it is, to be honest, what it takes, the je ne sais quoi to break through. For Ruby Kerr, I do know what helped her out. She was doing mildly okay, and then she had posted a picture where she had period blood in the picture, and they took it off. And then she's like, hey, that's not right. Like, people can show off this, but I can't show period blood. So I do respect her for actually why she got to be in a higher platform, but because she got a ton of support, yada yadas, then she got elevated, and that's when her poetry really started selling. So maybe I just need to spice it up. A little blood never hurt, right? Maybe I gotta toss in some theatrics to the poetry, right? Some explosions, something.
Yeah, absolutely. Drama. You know, spoken word is all the rage. You know, maybe you could just cut yourself while reading a poem. I don't know.
So actually, aside from the self mutilation and harm, I thought of a good idea that I thought I was going to bring forward, based on the name of the Sonnet group, Sonnet Sanctuary. So going to like different parks and basically installing installing art pieces. So you go to public parks and you in the cover of night, I'll be in my black hoodie, but I'm gonna basically put like because I work at the park and we have like these signs that'll tell you, oh, it's this kind of tree, so I know where to get the signs from, right? These little signs that you put in the ground and it's got a little plaque there. So I want to write a bunch of sonnets, have them all on these signs, and then just like put them through gardens and shit. So all of a sudden you just have these sonnet sanctuaries appearing overnight. But I also love the idea of like anonymous, the anonymous nature. I don't want to say the real word anonymity. Anonymity. There it is. It was not coming through. But I like the idea that like it just says Sonnet Sanctuary at the bottom or something. So no one has like the poet's name, but like they just start appearing town over town,
Right, right.
and then the people start talking about it, and maybe that would get a buzz going and it goes somewhere. But I think I want to do something nice, not something. I don't want to vandalize. See, that's like light vandalism because if like the city doesn't like it, just pull out the sign and you're
Right.
done. Like if I spray paint something, like, well, then I'm just a dick,
No, I think that is a massively, massively cool idea. I mean, it just in terms of my own little hood with its various and sundry crack addicts, um, just putting up a poem on a telephone pole below the various advertisements for missing cats would be really interesting.
Yeah, for bring art into the world. Someone might read it, and if they don't, it was the same as before. So
Yeah, absolutely. So let us talk about the new upcoming book,
the
which
new book,
is I can never pronounce it. Cicada Serenade.
yes, Cicada Serenade, because Antonio likes alliteration or things that phonetically sound like that. It's definitely going to be a bit more mature. Whereas you take like Pride's Crossing, and it's all over the map as far as poetry. I'm tossing out everything. Momentary Monet, you still have a little bit of that spice, but now you're seeing some maturity and thoughts going on. I think generally speaking, what you're going to get with Cicada Serenade is a more mature look, where yeah, there'll still be great wordplay. There's going to be great structure, but I don't want to say it this way because then people won't want it. But it's going to have less fun. It's going to have less of the poems that are just like fuck you. It's going to have more like these are meaty poems and less like sine qua non. Like it's going to be less of those types of poems for me.
Right, right.
And it's still going to have a range of ideas that I typically go through, a lot of psychological ideas. And I actually came up with the idea and the poem Cicada Serenade last November, before I knew it was a year of cicadas. But now I know I need to make this book drop now because that name will be useless next year. So like I'm shooting for September. It's probably going to be about 150 pages. I'm not making it terribly long, but you're going to get a good amount of literature. It definitely heavily features the Eramonian sonnet, and it also has a lot of bug analogies because that just somehow came up. Like cicadas, they're cool and all. I think the moth is one of the bugs that kind of gets me going a little bit, and this is probably going to delve into like the Silence of the Lambs sort of stuff, like right, like the guy who thinks he's a bug, but he also thinks he's dressed up in a woman's clothes and all this other stuff. And I think that the poem Mothballs It was a great stupid play on words. Sometimes there's brilliance and stupidity at the same time. I think it is both. I think it is a brilliant title and it's also stupid as hell. But to ball is to cry. But a mothball is what you put in the closet, right? So then the moths don't eat away that thing. So it's a good analogy of like closeted thoughts, right? And of changing clothes, and obviously moths would eat away at the clothes, but actually the eating out is something that's going on in the inside. So the character is actually the moth, and he's bawling his eyes out. And it definitely ended on a more sour note, if I recall. I think that was a suicide note. So, spoiler alert. But that's the kind of stuff I wanted to bring forward. I'm always enthralled with the idea of identity, and that's generally what all my books will probably be about because I'm always questioning it. I'm questioning who I am. Yeah, who knew? The guy with 30 alt accounts, he questions his identity. Okay, like big surprise.
Shocking.
Yeah, it's generally going to be a theme, but you're going to get a ton of other things. You're going to get a lot of reminiscent things, and you're going to get a lot of philosophical aspects. I love looking at nature. I'm not quite a transcendentalist, but I love what nature puts forward and just soaking it in and trying to immortalize it. Although I kind of make fun of that very thing in Momentary Monet. I think I wrote a poem where like we're trying to immortalize nature to the point that we cut down the tree that inspired us so then we can sell the art about the tree, which is just a vicious cycle. So, but I get inspired by places all the time. There's a place called the Flume in New Hampshire, and it's this nice waterfall area, and I got inspired by that, where I got this stupid idea where like the boulders are bolder. They're braver, right? Again, it's stupid brilliance. Like it's there, it's obvious, and you just take off with it. You get this one little click of words, and you just take off with it. So, plenty of wordplay, plenty of my trademark things going on. But I would also say it's a bit more mature stylistically, and I'm probably going to have it edited, so I don't need you all messaging me you used the wrong there afterwards. But if you find it, yeah, send me a message. I'll make the edits. So we're shooting for September. I'm trying to be super ambitious right now because Cicada Serenade in September. Ugh, that's a lot of S's. I'm also probably going to release the Sonnet Sanctuary anthology either end of August or September, and Poetic License magazine I want to get out by September. I wanted to get it out by August, but I'm a lazy motherfucker, so it's all going to be just like all the stars align, so all three will get published at once, which means that I'll cut into my own sales, which is real smart.
Just completely fucking bombard people.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still debating also tossing in some sketches because I like doing sketches, like little weird art things in it, but I also don't like it taking away too much from the art. So it's like there's an odd balance of I like it and I don't like it. Like we all like Where the Sidewalk Ends, Shel Silverstein. Everyone had that book. We all like it. Other people have bastardized it a little bit. I think it's nice to have it like every section or every chapter. But rather than every poem, I think if it's every poem, it's a bit of overkill. It's saying like my poem wasn't good enough. Here's a sketch to impress you. So there might be sketches. I also might just get lazy and say no. Read the book for the book.
Are the sketches in Momentary Monet yours?
Those are my sketches. Well, actually, technically, if you look on the inside cover, I think it's David Ramstein. But yes, they're me. Yeah, illustrations, copyright, David Ramsey. You guys don't know David. Like, I've been trying to keep him away from some of the general poetry groups that you guys are already in because I don't want you connecting more to us. He's a character. So, but yeah, those are my pieces of art, and like the cover of Momentary Monet. There's actually like two things you're supposed to actually see in that. Obviously, you can see a face, right? So that should be pretty obvious. It's very like scary, like psycho killer drew a face on the piece of paper, right? But also inside there, imagine, if you will, that the outside edges are a cup, and that's actually a plant, and those are two dilapidated flowers slowly dying off. And you can see that the mouth is a leaf. And it starts to become more clear that, oh, I guess you could see something else in there. But yeah, I was trying to make something a little obscure. It's just crazy enough that it might have worked. But then again, I also did my formatting to. I am trying to break through, just like everyone else. So let me try and paint this picture for you real quick. I'm going to grab a couple books and I'm going to show you something. Let's see if I got it right here. So I actually have an older version of it. I have it where it's got the white on it. Right? So it's the same face, but there's a couple different versions of it, right? So what I wanted to do is I was going off of... I have too many things stacked on my desk, so forgive me. Oh.
My desk is
here's the version you have. That's the normal version. Black cover, simple font. Black cover, simple font. Black cover, simple font. Now, as much as I hate Rupi Kaur, I bought the book to study it. You must study your enemy, as they say. Right? And then I found this other poet. All right? This book. These covers are very similar in nature, right? Like, you would assume they're by the same person.
Yeah.
So this person, they're more newer to the poetry sphere, but they're being quite successful. So, Pump Up, Courtney Peppernell, I think I'm actually friends with her on the Instagram. She's better than Rupi. But she definitely took the hints of what's going to sell, and I think it worked out for her. So right. I think with Momentary Monet, I was being a little bit like, oh, let me see if, let me do the black cover with a simple image on it and see what the hell happens. I don't think it did anything for me, so forget that. We're going my own direction a little bit more on the next one. So the cover art will be, I think I sent a picture to you. It's more playful, I think, too. It's light. I want it to be a bit, it's funny because the cover is more fun, but the inside is more heavy. I think it's going to be a heavier read for people.
That's awesome. So, what... sorry. So, when you mentioned that your Ruby Read account had like something like more than 100 likes per post, I'm super fascinated by, and it's an area I don't know a lot about. I'm super fascinated by tags on Instagram. So I decided to check your tags, and I thought they were super interesting and super fascinating, and there are a couple I want to point out.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
So we have Urdu poetry, Hindi poetry, we have quote poetry, which I know you hate. We have obviously Rupi Kaur poetry and Rupi Kaur socks.
So actually, I want to point out one thing there. So there's a poet who does like Rupi Kaur socks, and they're like parody poems in Rupi Kaur style, but just like, and it's hilarious. He's actually a very good writer. I got to like pump up his stuff more because it's funny. So my hashtagging, I didn't learn it overnight. I stole it over Google. I looked up popular poetry hashtags, and I found a website, and there's like 2 different bunches of words, and I was like, fine, copy, pasta. I am not sitting there typing up, aha, Hindu poetry. Like, I didn't come up with that one. But apparently those are like the most popular ones that'll get more views. So that helps out. But I think you do still have to cultivate a good enough fan base, because what I notice is this. If, in the beginning, if you don't have a big enough fan base, those first like 5 seconds, even the first 10 seconds, they matter. If you don't get like 1 or 2 likes from like 2 people who actually follow you, you're already sunk. You're gone. So you need to get like those 2 initial likes from the people who actually like you, and then you'll get those other likes from people that saw your stuff because it was ranked high enough. So it's a very tough game, because if you put out something and it wasn't successful within a day, it will never be successful. That's kind of the long and short of it. That's not going to be a successful poem. You either need to strike it. You'll know within the hour if you got the algorithm right. So if you did it wrong, honestly, take off the post, do it again, try again, repost the same shit, and see if it sticks better. Because Instagram, it moves too quick, and if you don't get that like if I don't have 20 likes within the hour, it's a complete failure. That post is going nowhere. But Instagram is very different than like Facebook. Facebook, you can sit around for a little while. I know my fans will come get me eventually, but like
Yeah.
Instagram, it ain't gonna show up on their feed. You can't be posting. And I have a terrible time about it. I write in the middle of the night, so sometimes I want to post a poem at 3 a.m. You can't post at 3 a.m. on Instagram. I haven't actually done Instagram for a while because it takes a lot out of you. You gotta really be in the zone for it. The hashtags are important. The timing is important. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I know. I've been learning a lot as I've been handling a lot of the Poetry Kingdom Instagram. Um, and it's really fascinating. It's definitely a very, very different world from Facebook. And you're right. You get those first initial hit, and then it just boom, just dies. Like you get that first initial hit, and it's just death. And I'm always learning, and I'm always researching um, this shit. But yeah, we went from in the beginning of we kind of re-visioned Instagram and kind of expanded and are trying new things. And in the beginning, it was like, you know, 9 likes per posts, and now it's up to like 30 or 40, and we're continuing to grow
Hey,
as I ineptly learn all of the various
you
new
can steal
things.
my hashtags. Go for it.
I'm totally gonna put Hindi and Urdu
I mean,
and
it's been working. Like the Ruby Read account, like 100 likes is a pretty standard amount at this point. So I'm pretty content with the amount that I get, and there's okay interaction. But I will say this: Facebook discussion is much better.
it is.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like the Instagram, like you don't get much. It feels less of a conversation. I don't know. It still hasn't clicked for me. There are some nice things about it. I think that the swiping for the photo. So like if you do like a what is it called, a carousel or whatever, you have like
Yeah.
multiple photos. What I started liking about it was I did a couple sonnets where you do like, oh, here's a quatrain, like here's the next quatrain, like so it works out for those ones because with like Facebook, I don't think their albums are presented as well. You're like, oh, here's some pictures, and you gotta click. It doesn't. I think that the album idea works much better on Instagram, so it's good if you want to break up a sonnet in that way. Although I personally love to try and fit it on one page. It
Yeah.
really sucks that we have to put imagery behind poetry. Like poetry has imagery in it, but it feels like that's the new norm. Like even on Facebook, I can't remember the last time I just put a poem straight, like you know, just as words. I'm always putting the background because I feel if you don't put that extra effort in, I feel like it gets ignored completely.
Yeah, definitely. And like on Facebook with the images, it's like when I posted the promo for this on the Poetry Kingdom Instagram, not the Instagram, the Facebook page. It's like you sent me a whole bunch of your poetry, but um, it needed to be the advertisement plus three, otherwise it would crush the images.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do, like Facebook has been around long enough. There should be more capability to promote things as an artist on it. But you know what? Zuckerberg doesn't listen to us, and when he does, he censors us. So I'd rather him not listen to us.
Yeah, definitely. Ignore, ignore, ignore. So, what advice would you give to artists who truly want to evolve and better themselves?
I'm going to give the advice that no one wants to hear, or the advice that no one else would give. Hmm. Don't read other poets. What? Just said
What?
it.
That's
I'm
bold.
going to say it in that respect because so what ends up happening is it can be good to read the right stuff, and it can be just as bad to read the wrong stuff. I think you're more of a purist if you're writing kind of for yourself. At least in the beginning, it'll be trash. Everyone's first poems are always going to be trash, but write your own trash. Then go to the phase of reading other people's stuff and learning some of the rules and enhancing your trash. I would say that it's actually better to start out with almost no idea towards what poetry is, because you come into it with such a blank slate and you're expressing your thoughts. You're not shaping how you're going to write. Because if you come in swinging, right, if the first thing you do is you read Tennyson or you read Shakespeare and you're like, I'm going to write poetry now. You know what you're going to do? You're not writing anything good. You're just trying to be something that you're not. And it's okay to impersonate later when you're trying to adopt traits and learn different things. But I think it's better, because all your first poems are going to be trash anyways, to not read any poems first and just write. And then learn what you're doing, learn the rules, then read, then write more. You're always going to be writing the whole time, but start with writing, then go to reading, because reading can be dangerous. That's why we burn books. It's dangerous stuff.
No, I mean it's a bold statement, but thinking about it, I think you're absolutely correct. Until you have an idea of what your voice is, and then once you have a definitive voice, then you can start to shape and modify shit. When thinking about my own journey, I was obviously writing the most basic bitch trash ever imaginable in the beginning. Started out writing a love poem about a girl who swept into the arms of my best friend. Uh,
I know that story.
but then um, in university, I discovered specifically the poetry of Jim Morrison. And that had a huge, profound effect on me in both a positive and a negative way. It completely blew my mind and opened me to new possibilities. But man, I was just a 4'11" Jim Morrison for a lot of years.
Well, I mean, the dude rhymed fire with fire, so he's, the pinnacle of poet. I've never forgiven him for that. Like, that's just, he didn't even try. But he didn't have to, because he was a persona as well. I think that he's an interesting one because when you have a persona, you can kind of transcend and basically do whatever you please. But his stuff it's a trip. It's different. It's interesting. Not personally my cup of tea. But I know plenty of people who will tell me, "Yep, this is the good stuff," and I'll be just like, "Okay." Like I don't really even like Ginsberg that much. Like, ooh, all right, I'm okay saying what I don't like and what I also like. I don't think that every poet is great, and I don't relate to every poet or every poem.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that there has to be an earnest reason why you're writing. Like losing a love that you never had. That's an earnest reason to write. You felt something and you needed to express it. And you know why you needed to express it? Because, like I was also a teenager crying into my pillow. And at a certain point, like you can't do that anymore. You got to express it in another way. And that's why we're bringing art forward. Like go to the origins of art, right? Why did we paint the saber-toothed tiger on the wall? To express a message. So that's why my fear of if you're writing because you read, if you read stuff and then you write, what you're doing is you're doing imitation. It's like me seeing that saber-toothed tiger on the wall and going, hey, I really like this whole art stuff. I'm going to paint a saber-toothed tiger over here. But I didn't see a saber-toothed tiger. I did not hear its roar. So I don't have the
Yeah.
right to express it in that way. And that's why I think it's actually better to express the crude cave painting drawing of the saber-toothed tiger that you saw, that you felt, that you understood. That's why write. Write, that's the first thing. That's the first step to being a writer is just write. Then you can read and perfect and yada yada. But write.
It's interesting. I recently wrote a piece where I tried to um, combine my Jim Morrison worship with my voice as it is now, and it was kind of an interesting experience because it was like Jim Morrison plus a whole bunch of pretty thesauric words plus some rhyming.
Did you like it in the end?
Yeah, I did.
Did you like? Yeah, 'cause that's always an interesting thing when you try and really do something different with your art. The question of did you yourself like it in the end? Because it can still be good, it can still be brilliant, but it's also a question of like, would I hang it on my wall? Like,
Yeah,
is it
yeah.
good enough for the fridge? Does mom approve? Yeah,
So
because I've
who?
written some poems where I'm just like, yeah, it was good, but it's also not good. I think in one of my poems I even talk about that. Like there's some of my work that I have burned. There's some that is crumpled up and in the trash can that I've unfolded and read again and then crumpled back up and put right back in the trash can. And like not everything comes out good. And that's also what makes the good ones so awesome when you know you did it right. Yeah.
I've I kind of view myself as kind of like the Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein of poetry. Uh, Sometimes when I write something that I don't like, I'll rip to pieces various lines and then stitch them into other things.
Yeah, no, when you have like a good gem, you hold on to that. If it's not the right poem, save it. Put it in the notes, bring it up later when the right time is. Because sometimes poems, they like, I think, who was it? Catherine Zagraff. She recently had to like finish up a piece that she's started like 10 years ago. Um, and yeah, sometimes poems aren't going to be finished while you're on the toilet seat on your 15-minute lunch break. Sometimes you need a little bit more time. Uh, and it's okay to revisit a line like I've definitely stolen lines from previous poems of mine when I realize I'm writing better now. This fits better. It's way. I like stealing from myself. It's one of the easiest things to tap into. But but yeah, I mean, poetry it does become a Frankenstein-esque thing. You look at like "Song of Myself," right? That poem changed over time. It just got longer and longer because I don't know. The guy just had more thoughts about life. Maybe you shouldn't start a poem about life when you're young. You should start it when you're old. You've already figured it out now. But he was learning and he continued to grow, which is it's interesting to compare the evolutions of that, like the different versions of it. But I think that's what poetry is. It's there is that kind of concrete nature we talked about where you're chiseling away. You brought out the David statue. But then there's other times where your perspectives do shift. I think we mentioned it the last time that I hope my perspectives shift over time because otherwise it means I'm not living life. If you need to have perspective shift over time. No one comes into life with all the right answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely has to be. I mean, definitely has to be evolution. Um, you know, there are some people that I come across that write the same poem every single day.
Yeah, and I
They,
mean it's like a wedding band. Like if you want to be a wedding band and you want to keep playing the same songs that aren't really even yours, sure. If that's your shtick, all right. But then there are others who like I've played in quite a few bands, and I always have one rule: we don't play cover boys. We never play covers. It's all new stuff. It's got to be the new stuff. It's got to be good. Um, but it's funny because some people, yeah, you're right. They're okay writing. There's some people who could write limericks all day, and just that's their thing. They're happy with it. They're happy just staying in that fun little world. But for some of us, we want to push the boundaries. We want to go beyond, and we want to because we're understanding ourselves better. So the better we can write, the better we can dig in and find that new angle to even. There's a lot of psychoanalytical stuff going on in my own poetry, aside from like my societal spews. So I like to dissect myself, and yeah, there's a few that hit the same topic, but I need to at least shine a different light on it. I have to do something different. I'm trying to see every angle that is me. Um, yeah, but I like refreshing. Refreshing is good.
yeah, absolutely. and definitely shifting perspective. It's interesting the balance, um, maintaining voice between evolving as an artist.
Yeah, and I kind of like it because you probably could chronologically put art together and see a shift in time and be like, event must have happened here because the perspective is now shifted from this point forward. And that's why like some people like doing that. They like researching the poet themselves and understanding their history and understanding why they would be writing that at that time in their life. There's both a good aspect of that and a bad aspect of it. I think you take away a bit of the mystique that is poetry when you dig too deep. That's why it's actually terrible that we know each other as poets. Like, it's better if we know nothing about each other because I think then I think it was actually just today. Someone made a comment on one of my poems and was like, "Oh, this could be read as satire or very yada yada. Depends on which personality." And it's like, you know too much about me. So it kind of ruins it in that respect. If you knew less about me than the poem broadened. Um, yeah.
And I don't know if you can hear that, but my cat is puking. So I'm not sure. Perhaps he has a different philosophical perspective on poetry.
He did not agree with that at all.
No, he did not agree with that. But then he's a cat, so he meows. He meows every day. So, okay, I gotta maintain my shit now. So, who are some of your favorite poets and your major influences?
So I'm gonna say it the stupid joke way first, and then I'll dive into the real answer. Um, Hello, my name is Antonio Eramo, and my favorite poet growing up as a child was Antonio Eramo. And that's a joke from the hockey sphere for people who don't get it. There's a player named Jaromir Jagr, and he was asked, they were doing like a sketch, and they were saying, like, who's your favorite player? And David Krejci goes up and he's like, I'm David Krejci. When I was growing up, my favorite player was Jaromir Jagr. And then Jaromir Jagr comes on and he goes, and Jaromir Jagr, my favorite player was Jaromir Jagr. And it passed by really quick. So for people who are not familiar with hockey, great players right there. No, honestly, it's funny. I wanna say Tennyson is one of my favorites, but realistically, I only like a handful of his poems. Frost, he's up there, but again, I only like a handful of his poems. I don't think I like anyone's entirety. I think entirities they always suck. And Shakespeare, he's all right. I think he's overhyped. I'm the king of like unpopular opinions on these types of things. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. There's one poet I really respect, new poet. I'll put it in the messages later. I'll put it on the comments later because I forget his name. But he's a language poet where he just rips things to shreds, and it's incredible what he does. But I've only read a handful of his stuff. I don't think there's any poet I truly respect. Like all their stuff. Like even the poets that I'm friends with on the Facebook. I like you, Patrick. I don't like all your stuff. I like some of it, but I don't like all of it. Brandy's nice. She writes some good poems. She also writes ones that I don't care about. Same with Will. Same with Lynette. Same with James. Everyone has their shining moments where I'll like some of the stuff, but a poet as an entirety, I think is poets were insufferable, man. Like I don't think you should ever like a poet and be like, yes, everything they write is perfect. No, there's a lot of bad, and the bad is because we're trying to do new things. We're trying to do good things. So you know what? You got to make some. What is it? You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. That's the expression or something. Yeah. And I think that we're all breaking some eggs, right? So in general, yeah, I guess like I said, Tennyson and Frost were one of the classics are at the top of my list, but I also don't love them. And it's tough because I attach on to personas though. Like so you go in like Lord Byron, love the persona, love the perspective. Not such a great poet in my. He's got a few okay ones, but his entirety sucks. There's a few okay ones. Entirety sucks. Mary Shelley was the best out of the romantics, hands
Mm,
down.
yeah.
And that's saying a lot because in that time, like a lady writer, ooh, and she kicked ass. But as far as entireties, I can't sit through a whole poetry collection. I usually have to do it piecemeal. Um, yeah, I wouldn't say I have a favorite poet. Shelf Silverstein definitely inspired me as a child, and now when I read his stuff, I don't know why I liked it so much. Like, because I thought it was more clever. I thought it was. I get it, but like pickle me, tickle me too. Like, just making up words. Like, it's cute. And maybe when I was a child, that was the pinnacle. It was great. And again, I think it's also the changing perspective over time, and that's why I can't like a poet forever.
Right.
Um,
But I think I know who your favorite poet is.
Ruby
And
Kerr. No.
Antonio Eramo.
You got it. No, actually, my
Because
favorite poet is Ruby Reed, and I think hers is Montego Sinclair, but he actually likes this guy named Patrick. So I don't know.
I know my favorite poet is Patrick Can. So that's
Good.
just
See, I feel like we should all embrace that sort of narcissistic, like I am Patrick. My favorite poet growing up was Patrick.
yeah, absolutely. I fucking false modesty is so fucking pointless.
Yeah, we're great poets. Let's embrace it. We're young once, YOLO, or whatever the kids say these days.
Whatever the children are saying these days, I have no idea. I'm too old. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Um, so I think we hit the nail on the head. We hit a few different aspects. One day I'm going to resurrect more Riddler on the Roof stuff and give you guys a few riddles, but right now I'm kind of stretching myself thin. I'm buying a house and all that other stuff, but I do love riddles. And I think riddles and poetry, like, if people who are watching, all four of our viewers, if you like poetry, write a riddle. It'll blow your mind what you can do over there because you're doing abstract stuff in poetry to begin with, but then a riddle, you're making the person guess the joke, and that's what's fun about it. Having like there's that huge interaction that you get from it, and it's more responsive than poetry. Like poetry, that's when you get comments like "nice ink, well penned." With a
Right.
riddle, people are guessing, and it's fun.
True.
So dive into riddles if you like poetry.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, absolutely pick up monetary money on all of the various Amazons. I got mine on Amazon.ca with moose pheromones and videos about the most violent hockey fights. And look out for Cicada Serone.
There you go. It was awesome, Patrick, and thank you for taking the time to do this little interview. It was fun. Always a pleasure to talk with you. I did a little less drinking this time, but I think we still had a good amount of fun.
No, this was absolutely fantastic, and we'll definitely be doing a video in the future. I'm just gonna spring this on you. I don't even know if Randy has had the time to talk to you about this yet, but the idea of having like not a prompt video, but having people submit poetry for constructive um, criticism, and then we both go over it.
I
I
like
think
it. I'm fine with it. I think we kind of tapered on that the last time when we were reading it because I like to not just read it. I like to dive into okay, what were you doing? What did we like? I'm on board for it. We can definitely work something out. I'm starting to learn how to do this whole live thing, and I think I got a face for radio, man. I'm ready to go.
yeah, you and me both, man. All right, that's gonna be a blast. All right, thank you everybody for checking us out. The live people and the people who watch the video later. Thank you very much from the Poetry Kingdom. This has been me, Patrick Can, Hobbit.poetry, and Antonio Ramo, the Caesar of Sonnets. Thank you
Peace
very
out,
much.
guys.
It's been awesome, dude. Have a great day, and I hope all of you out there in TV land have a great day as well. All right. Bye, peeps.
Ciao.